Happy divisional weekend, everybody in the NFL, and welcome into the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show exclusively on here, the Better Sports Network. I am Eric Balkman from the Fantasy Football Players Championship, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, and the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown. You can follow me on the X at Eric Balkman. Follow the FFPC on the X at FFPC. And by the way, while I'm telling you to do that, go to myffpc.com to play the FFPC Playoff Challenge number 2s. We got a couple of them going on right now. There's no draft or salary cap. You just choose the 8 players you want by kickoff of the first divisional playoff game. That's 3:30, Texans-Ravens. 4:30 Eastern time by kickoff of the first divisional playoff game at 4:30. And then watch that team that you put together, those 8 players, ride throughout the remainder of the postseason. You don't have to manipulate it or do anything going forward through the playoffs. It is set it and forget it. Ron Pompeel, or whatever his name is, would be very proud of this contest. Remember, only 1 player per NFL team. $35 entry fee will get you eligible for that $25,000 grand prize. A $200 entry fee will get you eligible for the $100,000 grand prize. That's myffpc.com, myffpc.com. Want to welcome in my special guest co-host tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the airwaves, the fantasy football influencer himself. You check out his rankings each and every week at the33rdteam.com. Check out everything he is contributing to fantasypros.com. And of course, basically a co-host at this point of the GOAT District podcast. He is Kevin Wheeler at FF_Wheeler on the X machine. Kev, I know I ask you this every time. Wheeler, Wheels, Kevin, what do you prefer tonight?
Wheels, Wheeler, Kev,
Wheeler?
any of those 3.
Okay.
Only my parents call me Kevin. Yeah, only my parents call me Kevin.
That works for me. That works for me for sure. You are a fantasy football enthusiast going on 3 decades, and you're totally retired. Enthusiast, analyst / enthusiast.
You're right.
Maybe analyst / enthusiast, one or the other, or whatever one you want to put forward. First, you are retired from the high school coaching and educating game.
Well, I'm still an educator, still a teacher. I've been teaching for 18 years, so I got another dozen years of teaching left in me. But yeah, I formerly coached baseball and football. Football was only 2 seasons, and we won 1 game. But baseball I did for about, I think it was 14 years, and I have a slew of county and regional championships. Fell short in the States a couple times, but
that happens. Yeah. You are going to help educate all the viewers tonight on the Better Sports Network on we'll touch on what happened in 2023, but I want to basically spend this first hour kind of taking a look ahead towards 2024 drafts. We're going to have the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, which we haven't really announced yet, but people have been signing up for it, and we have several leagues filled already. We're going to talk a little bit about 2024 drafts coming up, because we'll have that officially launched sometime next week. But then the second half of the show tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be analyzing the NFL playoffs from an FFPC Playoff Challenge 2 standpoint. You just heard me talk about it. An 8-player lineup, 1 player per team. Kev and I are going to try to put together the best possible lineup for you tonight to submit so you can win that $100,000 grand prize. The man behind the glass is the incomparable Tyler Soto, and away we go tonight. Let's go to Pittsburgh. Mike Tomlin, after his Steelers were eliminated from the playoffs by the Buffalo Bills, said that Kenny Pickett is going to return as the starter for 2024. Pickett, by the way, who skipped the exit press conference or whatever you want to call it for Pittsburgh. He's going to have competition for the job. Now, Tomlin said that he'd like Mason Rudolph to come in to be that competition for Kenny Pickett. However, he's a free agent, so there's no guarantee that he comes back to Pittsburgh. Pickett has, I think you can make the case, has been outplayed by Mason Rudolph as far as when Pickett was the starting quarterback and what Rudolph did down the stretch. It's been pretty amazing. I don't necessarily want to touch on this as far as Pickett goes, Kev, but I do want to talk a little bit about specifically Freiermuth, George Pickens, Deontay Johnson. These were players that we were very excited to draft in 2023. Johnson because of the target volume, Pickens because of the big playability, and Pat Freiermuth, for lack of another reason to like him, the tight end premium format of the FFPC. If Pickett comes back as the team starter next year, We already saw what he was able to do with those 3 players. Does that mean that these 3 guys are going to go down draft boards next year because people are not going to be excited to draft them? And if that is the case, do you see any of these 3 players, Pickens, Johnson, or Freiermuth, as a potential value in 2024 drafts?
Well, value all depends on how far they fall, right? I would imagine that Pickens will probably maintain his value because it seems like Rudolph likes throwing deep to him. Mm-hmm. But as far as the quarterback situation there, if there's a competition, if you're in competition with Rudolph, you've got issues. Like you really have to emerge, right? Like if Rudolph ends up being the quarterback, that whole team, I mean, they're going to be 10-7 and make the playoffs again, right? Like that's just what the Steelers do. But you're not going to see explosive offensive output from Johnson or Freiermuth. Like the only one you'll see is Pickens with a big play here and there, and it won't be really predictable. It'll be a best ball kind of play, better in best ball, as they say. Mm-hmm. But Pickens is really that guy. For managed leagues and consistency, you like Deontay Johnson because you knew he was going to get 10 targets a game, but it doesn't seem like he got that under Rudolph. I'd imagine with a full summer of practice that Rudolph will get used to Johnson, but Rudolph is going to be back too because Tomlin's the only one in the NFL that wants him. Why he does, I have no idea, but I think Pickett would probably emerge as the starter by summer's end. He's got the pedigree. You drafted him in the first round. It was the 20th pick, and it was a weak QB draft. But I would imagine that Pickett's going to get the next second, third, fourth chance, whatever chance he's on and whatever chance Rudolph is on. I would see Pickett winning that out. If Pickett wins it out, I look more towards Deontay Johnson, depending on how far he falls. But that would be my guy. If Rudolph ends up winning it out, Pickens is probably your pick. And Freiermuth, either way, kind of just becomes a touchdown-dependent tight end at that point.
I wonder if, and that makes sense, by the way, I wonder if Pittsburgh, who I believe has the 23rd pick, but I mean, that could change in the NFL draft right now based on the playoffs. I wonder if they would consider utilizing a first-round pick on a quarterback where they have Pickett and they have Rudolph. They can kind of get by. I mean, Tomlin's been able to get them to the playoffs. So they could tell themselves the narrative of like, we're good enough to get to the playoffs. We'll see what happens. And then in 1 year or then in 2 years, we have this first-round quarterback, boom, ready to go. And we'll get into Jordan Love in a little bit, but maybe that'll be the new kitschy thing to do in the NFL is actually letting a quarterback marinate for a year plus again, like Love did, like Patrick Mahomes did as well. I wonder if they would actually take a quarterback in the first round. And then all of a sudden, 2024 is sort of like a treading water year for them. And then 2025, they're loaded to try to take out Baltimore, Cleveland, and Cincinnati, or whoever in that division is going to be their main rivals. There's a non-zero chance of that as well. That's something that we would look at in 2025, not necessarily in 2024. What we can look towards in Pittsburgh this coming season, Kev, is the backfield, which I think is very compelling. Najee Harris in the Bills, the loss to the Bills in the wild card round, 12 carries for 37 yards. He got 2 catches for 15 yards in that game as well. Now, if we look at the flip side of the coin in Pittsburgh, as far as, well, not the flip side of the coin, but the other big guy in that backfield, Jaylen Warren, a guy who self-appointed himself as the starter, whatever that was, week 8 or week 9, 8 carries, 38 yards. He also got 2 catches for 16 yards. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on Harris versus Warren next year. Obviously, it goes it goes without saying, wherever these guys go in drafts will determine how we feel about them. But if we throw out ADP and we throw out, let's say, everybody's out there, how do we want to look at this Pittsburgh running back situation? There's a chance that Najee Harris does not get his 5th-year option picked up. And then at that point, Harris is playing for a contract. But I do know they like Warren as well. Your thoughts on the Pittsburgh running back situation in 2024, assuming it is a 2-horse race between Harris and Warren? Which guy do you like better? Which guy is more likely to end up on more of your teams next year?
So it depends on where they go, obviously, but I loved Warren this year. I thought he was going to emerge, and he was right up until they fired Matt Canada. Now, getting rid of him was a great idea, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But the new OC used Najee a good amount more than Jaylen Warren. And again, I don't think it matters who we or I like better. It matters who the coach likes better. Yeah. Running back is an opportunity-based position, and if Najee is going to get more touches, then we have to lean towards Najee as being the main back. I think it's a really split backfield at this point. 55-45 or even closer than that. But I don't think I would take either one of them until you're talking about like the 8th round. Like, ooh, maybe I'm overestimating that, but
well, I mean, I think the thing
I don't think I feel comfortable taking either one of them until the 8th round. Maybe that's a better way to put it. Like, yeah, I mean, I guess I have them ranked higher, but I don't feel good about it.
I think the thing to keep in mind with Harris and Warren is this. If you have to kind of extrapolate the backfield touches out, like the workload out. If you truly believe it's 55-45, ain't no way you're taking Najee Harris as high as what I think he might go next year. However, if you see it as a split, Jaylen Warren should be on a ton of your teams as your 4th running back, maybe even your 3rd running back. I think, and that's the way it worked out this year as well. I think that because we saw this late season surge from Harris, I was ready to say, week 12, week 13, I'm like, these guys are a horse apiece in the 8th round next year, maybe even the 9th round. I can't make heads or tails out of which one I like better. But because of this late season surge that we've seen from Harris, and you mentioned it with the new OC after Matt Canada got fired, was utilizing Harris quite a bit. That little spurt at the end might be enough to vault him up, not to the 3rd round or anything like that, but 5th round, 6th round. And then there might be enough disparity between the two to say, I'd like to get a piece of the Steelers backfield just to see what happens. 5th and 6th round on Harris, too expensive for me. Jaylen Warren, 8th and 9th round, yum, give me some, and I'll be taking, a lot of Jaylen Warren on my. That is how I foresee. It sounds like that's what you're thinking, and that's definitely what I'm thinking as well, is the cheaper of the two, and I think there's going to be a significant disparity in the rounds between Harris and Warren, too. Dom Gazzetti, who is watching us on YouTube tonight, who is wishing us a happy Thirsty Thursday. Here's my water right here because I am thirsty. Thank you, Dom. Najee, and Kev's got his too. Najee Harris was getting more than 60% of the rush attempts going into week 16. It's close to a split. So it's like going forward. So we'll see what they do next year. They could always do something in the draft as well. But with the FFPC drafts launching next week, I think you see the value in Warren and you don't want to overdraft Najee Harris. Moving on, Kev, to the Miami Dolphins here. Chris Greer, who is the GM in Miami, said they plan for Tua Tagovailoa to not only be the quarterback in 2024, but the long-term quarterback as well. He is going to be playing under his 5th-year option next year. I'm assuming they exercise it. It sounds like all the talk we have heard about Tagovailoa and the Dolphins being a long-term solution has been very positive on both sides. I want to scope this into 2024. We saw a tremendous year from the Miami offense, and we'll get into the skill position guys here shortly, but strictly from Tagovailoa. He was a player, Kev, that 6-7 weeks into the season, I was like, man, I should have gotten more Tagovailoa. I'm really going to regret not having enough of him on my teams. And then at the end of the season, if you include the playoffs, and I know that they're on the road in Kansas City, super cold game against some pretty talented defense, but the end of his season wasn't that great either. Tagovailoa, if I told you that you had to take him in the top 6 for quarterbacks next year, would you be on board? And then if I told you could get him at the 10th or 11th spot, would you be on board for that? Sort of, as of right now, where do you sort of envision taking Tagovailoa in 2024?
I right now have him ranked, and these ranks are just a glance. Mm-hmm. But right now I have him at QB 14. I have Jordan Love, Kyler Murray, Justin Herbert, Brock Purdy ahead of him. Anthony Richardson I have up there. Anthony Richardson might be a little bit high, but he's going to go high in drafts. Yeah. So he's really dependent on his receivers, right? And as soon as Waddle and Hill got banged up, Tua slowed down. There was nobody else there. I would say they probably should get him another consistent third receiver. That would help. But as of right now, I see 13 quarterbacks that are better than him in fantasy anyway. And I have Trevor Lawrence and Jared Goff behind him. I could be tempted to put those ahead of him. I have Stafford behind him. If Stafford comes back and everybody's in full health, I could see Stafford ahead of him. And Kirk Cousins.
That's another guy.
The more you look at the other quarterbacks, the more Tua drops. He was great, but that offense is really built around the run game. It's the old 49ers attack, and they like to run the ball. Now, Mostert's probably going to go. We're going to talk about him soon, but Mostert's 31. I would imagine they're going to get somebody else in there. There was talks of it all offseason. And even a solid running back would probably help too as well, whether it's dump offs or just, loading the box a little bit so those receivers can get open. But there's just too many more talented and opportunistic quarterbacks out there right now that I just don't see Tua as being an every week starter for your fantasy team. He's a live streamer, but not an every week starter.
I think the great thing about Tagovailoa, and especially where you have him ranked here, Kev, and if it plays out that way in drafts next year, I like him at that spot because, number one, I don't have to draft him as a starter, right? I'll draft my starter before him. And then number two, if I can get a guy with the upside of him, and if it plays out where he's crushing it with Hill and Waddle every single week, hey, wheels up, I'll pun intended. I'll definitely be playing Tagovailoa when the matchup is right. And maybe he ends up carving out a big season. Number two, quarterback 14, how big of a risk is that? It's not a big risk, and I can see the upside there, right? So I think Tagovailoa going forward, I'm not targeting him in any drafts, but if I wait on quarterback and I'm taking the 11th or 12th guy off the board, and then it comes back to me in the next round or the round after, and Tagovailoa is there, all of a sudden that looks pretty good.
Here's another thought, too. Beginning of the season, Miami was really using that home field to their advantage, putting the away team over in the heat where it's 30 degrees warmer on the other side of the field. That wearing them out, Tua is able to abuse them. So those early season home games, you might want to throw Tua in there and then maybe trade him after a couple of big games or something. But when the weather started getting colder and they started playing more away games, that's when you saw the decline as well.
I think and we move on to Raheem Mostert here, same team. The name that comes to mind, Kev, when I think of 2024 Raheem Mostert is 2023 Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs led the NFL in rushing in 2022. And I was very excited to not draft him in 2023 because I thought his price would be pushed up. The high-stakes players in the FFPC and where I play in the KFFSC, and Kev, I know you know this because you play in the FFPC too, they penalized him quite a bit. They did not reward him for the career year. They did not, and they penalized him for how old he was getting and the workload and everything. So he almost became a value for me in some leagues because he fell so far. Now you look to Raheem Mostert, who is going to be 33 years old next year at a running back, and he's not named Frank Gore. How he's doing it, I don't understand. But this is a guy who's under contract in 2024. I beg your pardon, he'll be 32 next year. He has a base salary of $2.3 million. His cap hit is $3.3 million. I think that there is a case to be made that says that they bring him back, and Achane back, and maybe Jeff Wilson, and maybe just go with the same three running backs again. I don't know. But if that is the case, I kind of see another Josh Jacobs situation presenting itself in the FFPC where everybody understands how old Mostert is. Everybody understands how dinged up he has been over the course of his career. And everybody understands that he is probably not worth drafting based on his 2023 season. I think he falls again, too. And if that's the case, if Mostert's going like where Josh Jacobs went last year, which is probably fifth, sixth round, if I can get a dude in the sixth round who rushed for, 21 had 21 touchdowns last year, I don't want to say I look the other way on his age, but all of a sudden at that point, he becomes a little bit more palatable. Your thoughts on Raheem Mostert, and we'll talk about Achane next.
So I think Mostert is maybe not a stay away, but his value is reduced in best ball. I have best ball brain. That's generally what I do a lot more of. But in a lineup setting league where you can drop players and, not have to worry about it, Mostert's probably, you're right, going to have a great first 5 or 6 games, kind of like Tua might. But I just don't see the age, the workload. I mean, he didn't have an excessive workload, but the age is going to get to him after a while. Then again, I think the reason he's still able to pull it off at 31 is because he was really a special teams player for many years. That contract he signed with Miami, when he signed it, I think it was everybody thought it was excessive when they signed it, but they really grabbed him for his special teams play, and he ended up playing more running back by default and emerging as one of their better ones, and had a career year this year. So I can see some overlap and, 5 or 6 weeks of, what we saw this year. But I just, the age factor, there's a cliff there, and he's well beyond it, and it's going to hit. And when the cliff hits, it hits hard. So as far as best ball, I mean, if I can get him in the 9th round, like we did last year, and I avoided him last year, and I'm kicking myself for it. I had tons of Achane, tons of Jeff Wilson late, and just avoided Mostert. I won't let him too far past me this year, but I think he's better in a lineup setting league where when he does get hurt, you can drop him.
Dominic Gazzetti pointing out that for years that this dude was a preseason fantasy football darling for the 49ers. And I remember those. I remember when he was coming into the league, and he was like a speed merchant, right, out of Purdue, like this insane, like he ran track in the Big Ten and did all this stuff, and he was super fast. And we don't think about Mostert that way at all. You know who we think about as the speed merchant in Miami now is Devon Achane, a guy that you could get later in drafts last year. He was a rookie. He was a player that we knew what he was capable of, but we did not necessarily project the ceiling that came out from Devon Achane this year. He bottomed out against Kansas City, but quite frankly, a ton of Miami Dolphins did. 6 carries for 9 yards and 30 yards from scrimmage. But this is a dude who averaged a shade under 8 yards per carry this season. And Achane, the fact that he is on a team where his big threat is a 32-year-old running back, to me, it would scream that this guy is a player that people are going to be fighting over to try to draft as early as possible next year. He could take it to the house on any given play. He has shown a penchant for catching passes, and he plays on, one of the better offenses in the NFL. If that's the case, knowing what he did this year, Kev, how high would you be willing to draft him? Knowing that and let's assume Mostert is going to be there next year, how high would you be willing to draft him? Because the upside is tantalizing. However, the draft capital with upside will go up as well.
So I have Devon. Wait, I keep calling him Achane. It's Achane.
Achane technically, but Achane. Plenty of people have already they've said, like, look, Achane sounds so much more cool. I don't care what he
actually
says. We're calling him Achane.
Last year I was calling him Achane, so I might stick with that. Achane. Anyway,
the French version.
Yeah, there you go. I have him as my RB10 for next year right now. I don't think he carries a full workload by any stretch of the imagination, but he doesn't need it. He's all explosive plays, and when he gets 12 to 15 touches, he's going to break one big. I really like him. The one drawback to him is he's 188 pounds, 190 pounds, so that durability factor is always going to be there. But you're right, he's a speed demon, and those explosive plays are going to carry you. So, like, I have him ranked, as an RB1, and we'll draft him accordingly.
All right, so you're drafting him as an RB1. I want to ask you this as I load up my FFPC ADP data from last year. I want to ask you how high you would take him in drafts as your running back 10. Now, the running back 10 last year in the FFPC main event was Jahmyr Gibbs. He went off the board at the 309 pick. Is Achane the type of guy that you would take in the mid to third round? Like that's where you'd be looking at him?
That's where I'm looking at him, yeah.
Okay. All right. And that's fine. And I'm not calling you out or anything. I think that's fair. If he's the 10th running back off the board and you're getting him there, you probably already have two other difference makers on your team. You could probably get another one in the fourth round as well. So Achane would make some sense there. And a potential guy who could, weigh out as much as he outperformed his, whatever he was going at last year. He was RB 41 in the 10th round. As much as he outperformed that, there's a non-zero chance that he outperforms mid-third round next year as well, for sure, for the Dolphins. Moving on to the Browns here. Yeah, we got time for the Browns. David Njoku. Now, here's a compelling one that I think is worth talking about, and I have a feeling I'm going to spend most of the offseason talking to people like you, analysts like you, as well as high-stakes fantasy football players like you about David Njoku. He caught 7 of 11 targets for 93 yards in the wild card loss to the Texans. But what that doesn't tell the whole story of what he was able to do towards the end of the season. This is a guy that when Flacco took over became one of the best tight ends, fantasy tight ends in the NFL. The key word or the key phrase there is when Flacco took over, and we know that Deshaun Watson, all things being equal, is going to be the starting quarterback next year for the Cleveland Browns. And Njoku was not great with Deshaun Watson this year. He really came into his own once Flacco took over. Now, is there some carryover here, Kevin? Like, where do you have Njoku as far as your tight ends go for next year? Because I think you could make a case that he's one of the top 4 or 5 tight ends. I think you could also put him outside the top 10. Where do you have him?
I have him at 5 right now. I am really aggravated that Deshaun Watson didn't explode this year. I will believe that his shoulder was hurt. He kept saying it was hurt. The organization didn't want to believe him. He appeared to kind of quit on his team, and he's an already hated guy and didn't build any fans there. From what I remember when he was with the Texans, though, Deshaun Watson did target his tight ends, and that's this year. I was extremely high on Cleveland, and that's why I lost a lot of money this year. But Njoku was my guy. I would get Watson, and then a round or two later, get Njoku, and I'd be set. That was and mix in Elijah Moore, and he was disappointing as well. But I really think we finally got to see Flacco unleashed him for sure. It's that extreme talent is in there. It just gave me some confirmation bias that what I know or what I thought about Njoku was right all along. But again, maybe it's because Flacco throws a very catchable ball. Maybe that's the difference. Njoku, he's always had a lot of drops, and even those first couple of weeks with Flacco, he had a lot of drops, or a decent amount of drops. But Flacco just stuck with him and kept targeting him. And the bottom line is, if he gets open that often, the quarterback has to target him. Like, it's got to happen. And I would say if they don't get any more talented receivers there, he'll be their wide receiver too. I think Elijah Moore is still a talented receiver, and Njoku made him look like, just a guy. So, yeah, I'm kind of high on Njoku and less so on Elijah Moore.
Well, let's talk about that. And I think that you can make a case on most NFL teams. There's 3 pass targets at a minimum that you can go with. And I think there are 3 that you could target here in Cleveland. Nick Chubb's not one of them. I mean, Nick Chubb will come back next year. I don't think he's one of them. He's never been a prolific pass catcher. And I don't really trust anybody behind him to be the 3rd target on the team. I think it comes down to Njoku, Cooper, and then Elijah Moore. You are bearish, Kev, on Elijah Moore going forward in 2024. And this is a player that Cleveland chose essentially over Donovan Peoples-Jones, who they chose to ship out. Maybe that's more of a commentary on DPJ than Elijah Moore. But you tend to be a little bit down with Moore, but up with Njoku.
Yeah, I just, from what we saw this season, like at the beginning of the year, I liked them both, and Elijah Moore just didn't show me much. Yeah, they got rid of DPJ, but I think that has more to do with Tillman starting to emerge, the rookie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just Elijah Moore just disappointed me this year. That's all I can say. I mean, he's not like a do not draft or anything, but he's going to have to fall.
And he might be a value. He might be a value in 2024 now.
I mean, I'm as frugal a guy as there is. If I find a value, I'm going to scoop it up. But, yeah, it's going to have to come at a value.
Those were the three teams that got eliminated from the AFC on Wild Card Weekend. The Browns, the Dolphins, and the Steelers. We're going to step out, take a quick break. When we come back, let's talk about the three teams that are eliminated in the NFC and where we go for their fantasy prospects going forward. We'll talk about the Cowboys in Dak Prescott and what Mike McCarthy staying on means. Does that mean like another big year here for Dallas on the offensive end? Let's talk about Los Angeles. Puka Nacua. How high is he going to go? How high should he go? And then we'll get into the Eagles as well. Jalen Hurts, Jason Kelce, who I think is going to have an impact on Jalen Hurts next year. We'll get into that. DeAndre Swift, and then what in the heck is going on with A.J. Brown? This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. He's Kev Wheeler from the 33rd Team Fantasy Pros. I am Eric Balkman from the FFPC. Stick around. We'll be back right after this.
Of the NHL games, I had a conversation with Coupe Fiasco yesterday when we were producing High Stakes, and he was talking about playing video games. And I, since he covers fantasy football, I said, "Hey, are you going to be getting the new Madden this year?" And he goes, "Yeah, I don't really play Madden. I play NHL." And that tells you, and it really does, that I do feel that the NHL game is better than Madden. I feel like Madden is overrated. The NHL game is so realistic. I don't know if you guys saw the trailer and all the new additions that they added to this game, but it really looks good. I tried finding all the games that I had of NHL, and I thought I had a lot. I only have 4 of them. And that's because I used to live with my my roommate and good friend who, got me into hockey, and we would play most of it in his house. So he has most of the games, but I do got 21.
There you go.
I got NHL 18. We got Connor McDavid up there. NHL 12, I think, was the start of the new consoles for me. But the big one, the holy grail of NHL games, NHL 94 for the Sega Genesis, right there. Look at that. Look at that beautiful cover. Look at it. Looks like a VHS tape. That's how good this game was.
No, let me stop you right there. So people, VHS tape, if you don't know, it's this like rectangular black plastic with the magnetic tape on the inside. Tape's this big. You put it in something called a VCR. For a little while, there was something called Beta that didn't last too long.
Look at this cartridge. I mean, they're not cartridges anymore. They're either discs or those little memory cards. But man, that thing is thick, right? And
you don't even need a cartridge or a disc anymore. You can buy the digital version.
And then you got Ron Barr on the book. I mean, he used to be always in the intro telling you about the team and what was going to be happening in the game. So NHL 94 is by far my favorite game, sports game. I love that game.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show rolls on exclusively here on the Better Sports Network. I am Eric Balkman from the FFPC. You can find me on the X at Eric Balkman. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown as well. Want to remind everybody that you can go to myffpc.com, play in the FFPC Playoff Challenge 2s right now. 8 teams, 1 player per team. Win $100,000. If you want to enter for $200, you can also win $25,000 if you want to enter at the $35 level. There is room still in that contest, even though we're less than 48 hours away from it locking. It will lock at the Texans-Ravens kickoff Saturday afternoon at 4:30. Remember, 1 player per team. It's going to be a blast. The FFPC Playoff Challenge 2 at myffpc.com. myffpc.com. We talked with Kev Wheeler here, my guest co-host tonight from the 33rd Team Fantasy Pros, and of course the GOAT District podcast. We talked about the AFC teams that were eliminated from the playoffs, kind of took a look ahead towards what's in store for drafting those players in 2024. Let's take a look at the NFC. The Dallas Cowboys, the number 2 seeded Dallas Cowboys, who looked like world beaters throughout the season, they looked like less than that against the Packers on Sunday afternoon. Mike McCarthy, who Jerry Jones decided to retain, says that Dak Prescott is the answer and the solution going forward for the Cowboys offense. Let's do some lazy analysis here, Kev. Same head coach, probably same offensive idea, same big year for Dak Prescott, same big year for CeeDee Lamb, same big year for Jake Ferguson, or is it more nuanced than that? Will we see Tony Pollard a full year, recovered off that nasty injury that ended his 2022 season prematurely? Are we going to see him step up? Is there any, we don't even know if Brandon Cooks is going to come back. Michael Gallup, who knows with him? When you look at the Dallas offense next year, is there anybody that wets your whistle? Is there anybody that gets you excited as far as 2024 drafting goes?
I feel like they'll all be drafted right around the same. Well, no, Dak will actually probably be higher. I have Dak right now. I'm taking a look at it. I'm like, I can't believe I have him as my QB5, but he finished this year as QB3, depending on the scoring format, I guess. And given full health, even if he does lose Brandon Cooks, they'll get somebody else in there. That's the one thing. They're not going to mind spending money and getting the right guys. And when you talk about Pollard in that situation, I think you're going to see another running back come in there and Pollard split time again. I would think as he's coming off his injury, you'll see him perform better. But I also think he was better off with less of a load. Like the name that keeps popping in my head is Derrick Henry. Like, don't you think Jerry Jones goes and gets Derrick Henry? Like, maybe that takes away from Dak. Maybe it adds to the offense, though. I still have to be high on Dak. Like, do I want to bet on them in the playoffs? But I did plenty of that this year. I thought the Cowboys had a chance to do it this year. And I'm a Giants fan. I don't. Right. Last year I put a lot of money on the Eagles, so that worked out for me too. But I expect more of the same, given health. As long as they're healthy, more of the same. CD is amazing, right? Like, how could you not succeed with CD? So,
where do you have Prescott as a top 5 quarterback next year?
Yeah, I have him at number 5.
Oh, right at number 5. Okay.
Yeah.
And so like I kind of joked about this with lazy analysis, but is there something to be said for, if Jones is bringing back everybody next year and the Cowboys core stays the same, we kind of should expect a big year too. Maybe the other thing too to keep in mind is if they do bring in somebody like Henry, maybe Henry and Pollard would take away from the passing game a little bit then.
Maybe, but doesn't that just add to the offense overall? When you're adding a running back, especially like a Derrick Henry, aren't you adding him for the second half? Aren't you building your lead with CeeDee Lamb and then running down the clock? So yes, maybe it does take a bit off the top, but I don't think if Henry comes in, I don't think you see a full workload from him either. I think maybe you see Pollard getting more dump offs rather than handoffs. And if they're dump offs and he's taking them to the house, there goes your Dak points. So, no matter what they add or they change, what you're looking at is consistent first downs and drives continuing. And that's really what you want for your quarterback.
And that's what you want for your offense too.
Yeah,
a rising tide raises all ships, right?
Exactly.
Derrick Henry could be that rising tide for Dallas next
Absolutely.
year. Jack Senzon on YouTube right now, as long as we're talking Cowboys, how high do you have Ferguson in your tight end rankings, Kev, going forward? Is he a top 10 guy? He ended with such a big bang with the 10 catches, the 90 some yards, and 3 touchdowns against Green Bay. It's hard not to have recency bias with him. But I think we got to keep in mind, too, that he is not the main target hog on this team. That's CeeDee Lamb. Where do you have Ferguson next year?
So the tight end landscape is always extremely difficult, and I'm hedging this right now. Like, I do have him at tight end 11, but I'm also looking at it like that's probably too low. But I like, okay, I could drop Goddard below him. I could drop Kincaid below him just because they're not going to see the same amount of targets in theory. But, you know, Kincaid's a better athlete. He's younger. He's going to be used in the slot. You know, is Diggs still there? Who's their outside wide receiver? I'm not going to put Kincaid below him. Like, as far as I can tell right now, as high as I could rank Ferguson would be tight end 10, because ahead of him would be Kincaid, Hawkinson, Ingram, Kittle, Njoku, McBride, Andrews, Kelsey, Laporta.
Mm-hmm. I think is there kind of a bunch of them at like that, the end of the tight end 1, the start of the tight end 2s for you?
This year, in previous years, it's been Kelsey as tight end 1, and then maybe a group of 3. This year, this coming in 2024, I almost see it as get any of the top 10 tight ends, get any of the top 11 tight ends, and they're kind of because Kelsey has dropped that tier, right? And we've seen a guy like McBride jump way up and Njoku jump way up. And although Ingram is right around the same spot he is now a consistent tight end we can start every week. We know that now. And what really separates, I mean, TJ Hawkinson, I have him too low. There's no way he should be tight end 8. Like, but then I guess I could drop McBride because he's not technically proven, and if they get more receivers in there, he's going to see fewer targets. But really, he emerged and he was a stud in the second half of the year. So yeah, in all honesty, I think that maybe the first 8 tight ends are the tight end 1 tier, and then he fits in a smaller tight end 2 here. Like, I even have. He's ahead of Kyle Pitts. What, you know, they get a new coach in there and they use Kyle Pitts, and all of a sudden Kyle Pitts could be the tight end 1. So like the top 12 tight ends, any of them have the potential to be tight end 1.
You said you have Hawkinson ranked 8th?
Yeah, right now. I mean, that's probably a mistake, right? Like, I don't know. These are preliminary. These are just glance. So
I mean, like, I think if you want to rank Hawkinson right now, you have to sort of take a stand on when you think he's coming back, right?
Right.
I think you could tell yourself a couple of stories here. You tell yourself the story that the Vikings may not be very good next year, and if they're not very good, and Hawkinson isn't ready to start the season, by the time he's ready, maybe he doesn't come back at all because there's nothing to come back to. You could also tell yourself the story that he's a young guy. He might recover from this ACL fast. And there's a non-zero chance that he's ready sometime in September or early October. And if that's the case, then tight end 8 is probably too low. It almost seems like you're hedging a little bit. We're like, it's right in the middle of like what it could be, right? Because like ceiling is like tight end 3, tight end. Well, was he tight end 1 this year, or was he tight end 1 last? I mean, he was right up there with all the catches that he had. But the ceiling for him is so high. But I still believe there's a non-zero chance that he doesn't even hit his floor because he could not be relevant in 2024 drafts.
Yeah, he was the tight end 4 this year, PPR scoring, as far as I could tell overall. Yeah, tight end 3 in average points per game. But so yeah, I could see him being tight end 4, and if he comes back day 1 in full health and Kirk Cousins is the quarterback and everything is status quo, yeah, I would jump him up ahead of McBride. But there's a lot in flux there, so that's really why I'm hedging my bet and have him at tight end 8 right now. In fact, all of this is a hedge. It's January.
Right, exactly. Well, but here's the thing. Like, Kev, you've drafted super early before, right?
Oh, yeah. I have drafted right around this time, maybe a week from now. But it was my resolution last year, and I stuck to it. I'm not going to draft for the season until after the Super Bowl. After the Super Bowl, all bets are off.
So so when you have a case like Hawkinson, I think is fascinating because you can go a couple of different ways. You could look at Hawkinson as like, it's January. I'm going to be risking a lot. Well, I mean, not risking a lot, but I'm going to swing for the fences here with Hawkinson and grab him late, and we'll see what happens. Or that's one school of thought. The other school of thought is there is so much influx with all these teams and all these players. Maybe I just go safe. And safe to me would be a guy like Trey McBride, where you kind of know he's coming in healthy. You kind of know what the offense is going to be. He is more of a safer pick. When you analyze both of those aspects of drafting early, which one do you normally subscribe to?
I always try to look for value, but yeah, I would probably wait and get the Hawkinson. Drafting Trey McBride as tight end 4 when there's a good chance that they draft Marvin Harrison Jr. and then still have and get back Hollywood at receiver back healthy. There's a lot of moving parts there and a lot of moving pieces. I see McBride as being the one that ends up falling a little bit by the end of the year. And that's what when I'm drafting early, when I'm drafting in February, I'm drafting the guys like who's going to move up the draft board, who's going to move down the draft board. If you're going to move down the draft board, I'm going to wait until you move down the draft board. If you're going to move up the draft board, I might scoop you around early. But other than that, like when you're drafting this early, you should kind of hedge your bet and play, don't pile up on any one player. Know how much ownership and rostership you have of each player. I got a little carried away with J.K. Dobbins last year, and I paid the price for that one. So, like, Trey McBride is a guy that I was scooping up real late last year, and I feel like I drove up his price. But then I stopped in June, and for a while there, I was quite happy. And then the end of the year, I was like, "Damn, why did I stop drafting it?" But yeah, you kind of spread out your exposure, so to speak, early on in the year. So, but I will try to be, catching those sleepers and the guys that I believe are going to drive, move up draft boards later on in the year. Those are the guys that I kind of want to get at a value.
We have another tight end question here from YouTube from Dom Gazzetti, who wants to know, Kev, where would you rank Brock Bowers, the rookie or the incoming rookie from Georgia, who I think in previous years we probably wouldn't be too excited about. But when we saw what Laporta and Kincaid did, especially those two guys this year, we saw flashes from Michael Mayer and Luke Musgrave as well. And isn't there another rookie tight end from this year that I'm forgetting? Who am I forgetting? Who's the other big one? Tucker Kraft down the stretch, but
right. You said Mayer.
Yeah, Mayer. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, so when you look at, especially Kincaid and Laporta, and Bowers could be the best prospect out of all these guys, and knowing that the rookie tight end thing, where they can't produce year one, it was kind of disproved multiple times this year. Where would you put Bowers in your tight end rankings?
So, to me, that's all landing spot dependent. Coupe Fiasco, and Andrew Cooper, I think his name is.
Absolutely.
He's the tight end whisperer or the tight end guru. Dan Williamson is the tight end whisperer. But between those two, Coupe Fiasco, he's the one that he really is. Is that tight end the second receiver on your team? If he ends up being the third look, he gets less targets. So if Bowers ends up in a spot where he's the second look in his offense, to the moon. And that's kind of where Laporta ended up, right? Like after Amon-Ra, there's a bunch of guys there. There's some talent there. But Laporta's the second look on that team. So really, I'm high on Bowers. I have a super tight end premium dynasty league that I am hoping he falls to the 5th pick in. But we'll see about that. Yeah, I'm high on him. Where would he fit in? It depends on his landing spot.
Mm-hmm.
And again, he's gonna fit in this territory. Does he go ahead of Hawkinson and Kincaid? Does he go ahead of Ingram? Maybe. Kittle is one of those guys that's a kind of boom and bust guy. So I could see Bowers being as high as tight end 4. And maybe that, like, do I want to put him ahead of Kelsey? And actually, you know what? I think maybe I need to move Kelsey down too.
Mm-hmm.
Where was Kelsey ended the tight end 3 this year, but hey, who knows? Kelsey might just say peace out too.
There's non-zero chance of that. And also, Kelsey really fell off, like as far as Travis Kelsey in capital letters, when Rashee Rice stepped up. Like when Rice started stepping up, that was eating into Kelsey's production too. And if Rice continues this crescendo up, the wide receiver rankings, probably going to have a negative effect on Travis Kelsey going forward too. I think there's we have just scraped the surface on the tight ends. Like it is compelling.
Tight end has a lot of moving pieces.
Mm-hmm. And we're talking about 2024 drafts. One of the most compelling and potentially polarizing players that will be in 2024 drafts is a dude who in some Fantasy Pros drafts, in some FFPC main event drafts, some FFPC best ball drafts wasn't even drafted this year. And he ends up finishing right at the top of the wide receiver leaderboard or near the top of the wide receiver leaderboard. And that is rookie Puka Nacua. 9 catches out of 10 targets for 181 yards and a touchdown. And the Rams lost to the Lions in the wild card round. He had 1 carry for -2 yards as well. I don't even know where to start with him because we don't really have an appropriate comp, do we? I mean, Anquan Bolden, that's not fair. It's not fair to Bolden, like because Nacua was like a day 3 pick. Who saw this guy? There was a few guys that were really pumping him up on X. I think about Derek Brown from Fantasy Pros, Thor Nystrom from Fantasy Pros, 2 of the former co-hosts of this show. They were both telling anybody who would listen, like, Nacua is going to be good. I don't know if they thought this good, but Nacua is a guy that we're talking about as a potential first-round pick from a guy who was not even drafted in some high-stakes leagues last year. Kev, what can you share about where you have Nacua ranked and sort of your thoughts on the production level in 2024 for him as it compared to this past year?
I mean, he's the real deal. I have him at wide receiver 8, right behind Garrett Wilson and ahead of DJ Moore. And I love DJ Moore, but I mean, Puka finished where I want to say it was, I just had it here. Wide receiver 4 in PPR scoring. Let me look at points per game.
And
he was down at wide receiver 6 in points per game, but still like ahead of DJ Moore, right behind Justin Jefferson in points per game. Right behind him on Brown. Like I'm on.
And the other thing too is like he had a lot, not all of them, but he did have a lot of big games with Cooper Kupp in the lineup too.
Yeah, and towards the end of the season, he was the wide receiver 1 on that team. He's definitely, and I had Cooper Kupp in my FFPC playoff bracket because I thought, all right, playoffs, Stafford, Cooper Kupp less owned. I'm being smart about this, but Nacua is the one. He's the alpha. He is the guy. I mean, he's 6'2", 210. He's gonna be able to handle the workload. He showed it. To me, he's the real deal, and he's a wide receiver 1 in my book.
What about Cooper Kupp? Flip side of the coin.
Where do I have Cooper Kupp?
Because the other thing working against Kupp, and not only Nacua, but Kupp's no spring chicken, and he's dealt with some soft tissue injuries now too.
I don't even see where I have my.
See, this is a testament. How low does Kev Wheeler have Cooper Kupp? He can't even find him. He's got him.
He's wide receiver 32, right behind Chris Godwin and DeAndre Hopkins. So
the mighty have fallen.
He could move up some, but I mean, At best, he'd be a low-end wide receiver two, top
wide receiver
high-end wide. He's wide receiver 3. He's like, the way I'm looking at it, I don't think I'm ever gonna put Kupp ahead of Jalen Waddle, T. Higgins. Maybe
you're talking
that's his peak.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you're talking about a player who has descending value associated to his name because of age, because of injury, and because of Puka Nacua. Like this is the new normal, as the kids say, with in regards to Cooper Kupp. So there's going to be some name value that will probably keep him above where I'm comfortable drafting him. But I mean, if 30 wide receivers are going off the board before him, yeah, I'd look at him as my third receiver, maybe my fourth if I go wide receiver heavy, and that could be interesting. But I also got to understand that it is Puka Nacua's wide receiver room now, not Cooper Kupp's going forward. As difficult as Nacua is going to be, well, maybe Cooper Kupp, as difficult as those guys are going to be to rank this coming year. What about the backfield? Kyren Williams, a guy that was not pedigreed, was a low draft pick, had a horrible combine, started off the year as the backup to Cam Akers. He breaks his hand. I mean, obviously, we're not concerned about that for 2024 with him recovering from that. But you could make a case that he could be a first-round pick or a second-round pick. You could also make the case that the Rams add somebody via either via free agency or the draft, and all of a sudden Kyren Williams just gets his value torpedoed. The question here is for the people who are drafting next week and 2 weeks from now. What do you do with Kyren Williams in those drafts, Kev, when you know that Kyren Williams' ceiling is high, but his value is volatile on that Rams team?
So right now I have him as my running back 5 right behind Jonathan Taylor. That sounds so weird, but he's ahead of it. He's right ahead of Travis Etienne. Like the running back, it's not very deep. Mm-hmm. Running back is not very deep. In fact, like in my number 1 is Christian McCaffrey. Like I don't think there's any question about that. But I got Breece Hall and Bijan as my 2 and 3, and then Jonathan Taylor is my 4. And like even that, though, Breece Hall and Bijan are immense talents, but Bijan was misused this year. Hall was on an awful team. What's to say that doesn't continue? I don't think it does. That's why I have him ranked high. But I'm going on a wing and a prayer there, right? I'm going on the hype. I'm going on the draft capital, essentially there. Jonathan Taylor, if he stays healthy, should be within this range. But, he's been injured in the past 2 seasons. So yeah, I have Kyren as my RB5 right now, and honestly don't feel great about any running backs. I think this year might be another one of those 0 RB this year, except for maybe those top 3, except for Christian McCaffrey for sure. But yeah, it might be.
McCaffrey's like top 3 in and of himself. Top 3 running backs next year. McCaffrey. Like until he shows us that age is caught up or injuries is caught up.
Right.
I think there's something to be said for that. I think. Well, let's continue this conversation as far as running backs go. I'm going to start to weave a lot of topics here together. By the way, shout out to Cullen Hoffman, who is joining us on YouTube right now. Cullen Hoffman, a winner of $10,000 plus in the FFPC Best Ball tournament this year. So shout out to him. Who is joining us tonight. The Eagles, Kev. Maybe you hate talking about them because they're the arch rival of the Giants. Maybe you love talking about them because they are out of the playoffs. And my God, I don't remember a worse end to a season for a team that looked primed to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl for the second straight year. Few things to cover here with the Eagles. Adam Schefter's reported that Jason Kelce is hanging it up. He's retiring, so they're not going to have their Pro Bowl center next year. Part of the cachet of owning Jalen Hurts was the fact that they would do the brotherly shove, the tush push, as it were, to get a lot of touchdowns for Hurts. When I would watch those plays, I always said it starts with the center, with how low Kelce got on these plays, and always made a great way for Hurts to get up the field for whatever he needed. 1 yard, 2 yards, touchdown, whatever. They're not going to have that next year. So number one, how do you view Hurts as far as your quarterbacks go? Because I think that does take away a significant part of his value. And number two, DeAndre Swift. What happens with him? If they're not doing the tush push next year and Swift becomes relevant inside the 10, inside the 5 again, he might be undervalued as a guy that could be going in the 8th or 9th round, giving you maybe 4th round value too. So if we're to look at the Kelsey angle from both Jalen Hurts and DeAndre Swift's point of view, how are you looking at these guys in 2024 for Philadelphia?
Actually, I haven't even considered that yet, but now that I will probably, it definitely hurts. I'm not sure it helps Swift though. Swift, I think, needs a quarterback that's going to dump it off to him. I don't see Swift as an inside runner. He's had generally the best offensive. Philly is one of the best offensive lines all season, and we didn't see much from Swift. Sure, we might see him get a few more goal line carries, but I don't necessarily think I believe Jason Kelsey leaving is going to hurt that particular play. Mm-hmm. But I've said all along they need to develop other plays. They need to develop other goal line strategy. Finally, they ran into a defensive line with Vita Vea that was able to stop them. But that the teams are going to find ways to stop that. And if you look, though, Buffalo with Josh Allen, he's learned how to tush push slightly differently, where he kind of comes off the center and gets pushed. The whole idea of it is you're getting pushed from behind, right? Like, and I don't see how that hasn't led to more injuries, to be honest. And I think that's why it was originally banned in the first place. But I guess there's some sort of technique that they're learning that they're able to push him forward. And I don't necessarily think, yes, Hurts got behind the center to do it, but I don't think you need to do that. There are other ways to quarterback sneak. Tom Brady had a killer quarterback sneak. He had like 4 or 5 rushing touchdowns every year because he knew how to sneak the ball in. Mm-hmm. So I don't, yes, there's probably some of that gets diminished, but I don't think Swift is necessarily the benefactor from that. I'm not very high on Swift at all. I haven't factored this in at all, really. I had Jalen Hurts as my QB2 going into next season. But again, that could all shift as well. It's not going to shift that much. I mean, who am I going to put ahead of him? Maybe Lamar, maybe Dak. I have Patrick and Mahomes have QB4 right now, but that's kind of by default almost. He's going to need another receiver, especially if he loses Travis Kelce. Yeah. There's a lot of factors that'll go into that, but I don't think it diminishes Hurts a ton. I think maybe they either reinvent the tush push or they reinvent another way to get that ball across the goal line. But Philly all around has some major issues. AJ Brown, I don't think is coming back to Philly. He's going to work his way out of town somehow. It just seems as though that he wanted out, and when receivers get that way, they generally are able to get out. Which is surprising. AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts had that. They were friends. When AJ Brown came to the team, they went to Disney World together right away or something like that.
I think what's compelling here is, obviously AJ Brown, if he's out, Devontae Smith could be a big time value in a lot of these early drafts, Kev.
For sure. But I don't think they just let AJ Brown go. I think they're going to replace him with something. Yeah. But regardless, yes, Devontae Smith would benefit from AJ Brown leaving town, depending on who else they would get. Mm-hmm.
You know who would be kind of interesting, and they wouldn't do this because I believe he's a free agent. What about T. Higgins to Philly? Because I think the way he wins on offense at receiver is very similar to what AJ Brown is doing. It's not perfect complementary piece to Devontae Smith, but it's interesting. And if Philly can recoup some draft picks where they're not paying these players, they could, and they get rid of A.J. Brown's salary, all of a sudden Higgins becomes a lot more affordable, comes to a pretty good offense. There's a lot to like there. That's just bulky speculation. It's bulky speculation. We can like it. We could talk about it, but I'll slow up. To borrow Steve Harvey's phrase, we'll slow our role player on that because there's a lot of things that have to happen in order for that to happen. Now, Tyler Soto, our producer tonight, pointed out that on the latest New Heights podcast with Jason and Travis Kelce, that Jason Kelce said he's going to share his retirement decision in the future. So the retirement is not official yet. We'll see what happens going forward with that. So right now we are in a holding pattern at this point here. Joe King watching us on YouTube, he thinks T. Higgins is going to Carolina to be their new number one receiver and number one target for Bryce Young. That'd be interesting too.
Nah.
No,
I'd like to see Higgins on Philly replace it. I mean, I'd like to see a happy AJ Brown on Philly. Like, I really like that, but it just seems as though he wants out of town and there's no repairing that relationship. So yeah, I really like that T. Higgins idea. I feel as though that would unleash Higgins. I like Higgins a lot. I think it's a really good talent. I think he's been kind of stifled in that offense. Burrow and Chase have that, college connection going. Mm-hmm. And I think Higgins has just been overlooked. I think on most teams, Higgins can be the alpha, and I would be excited to see that on Philly, not so much on Carolina. I'm not into their offense. I never thought Young was really going to emerge as a top-tier talent in the NFL. Even pre-draft, post-draft didn't matter. I had Bryce Young as my QB3 in that class. And he's done nothing to make me think that Carolina is going to go anywhere with him as quarterback.
The Carolina Panthers offense, as far as fantasy goes, you need to look at that situation. They need a head coach. They need playmakers on the perimeter. I don't think Jonathan Mingo is a future number one. And then David Tepper as the owner. To me, he screams impatient owner, like hashtag impatient owner, David Tepper. And like it could never, like we could already be looking at Bryce Young as like, God, if only he would have had the consistency early on in his career, and maybe he wouldn't have busted. Like, I don't know. We're living in the matrix at this point. I hope it gets better in Carolina, but the Panthers are certainly not a team that I am targeting in fantasy drafts next year. That is all the teams that have been eliminated that we talked about tonight. I'll tell you what we'll do. We have not talked anything about the NFL Divisional Playoffs. We talked very little about the FFPC Playoff Challenge too. What I'm going to do is I'm going to quiz you, Kev, on the players that you want to target in this competition, which will close in a little bit less than 48 hours at myffpc.com. We'll go team by team in the next segment, and then to finish up, we'll actually put together a lineup in this, and maybe somebody can use it to win $100,000. You never know. He is Kev Wheeler at FF Wheeler on the X Machine. Of course, you check out his rankings each and every week at the 33rd Team. Check out his work at Fantasy Pros as well, and listen to him on the GOAT District podcast when he pops on there as well. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, hour number 2 is on its way next. Don't you go anywhere.
The Bears have to be one of the most inept franchises of any sport I've ever seen in my entire life. And they share the city with the White Sox, who are also inept. Like, that is how bad the Bears are. I just don't understand how you can go your entire existence and the quarterback that wins you a Super Bowl is Jim McMahon. You couldn't find anybody else.
They don't have a good history with quarterbacks, but they let him be the quarterback for a long time too.
Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes right there. Mm-hmm. And you drafted Mitch Trubisky. They were right there. There's a lot of pain in being a Falcons fan. The Bears are one of the teams I could argue they might have it worse, and they have a Super Bowl.
And
when the best quarterback in the past 50 years is Jay Cutler, you have a problem.
That's so funny that you just said that. We were talking about Jay Cutler the other day, me and my friend, and I was like, yeah, he was on, because we were watching the Colorado Rockies game against the Giants, and it looked like he was behind the thing. He played for Denver most of his career. We looked it up. Chicago let him be their starting quarterback way too long.
Here's the thing too, is that Jay Cutler wasn't bad. Like, he was erratic. He wasn't terrible though.
The poor man's Brett Favre.
I'm taking him over Justin Fields. I'm sorry.
I would.
But Jay Cutler led that team to an NFC title game.
Yeah.
That they lost to Green Bay. But he's gotten farther than anybody else. You want to know who the other starting quarterback was for the Bears in the other Super Bowl appearance they made? It was Rex Grossman. What are we doing out here? It was Rex Grossman and Kyle Orton was the backup. How are you that bad? Bro, like, oh my God. Listen to the top 5. According to Football Reference, the top 5 greatest Bears quarterbacks of all time. Jay Cutler, number 1.
I can't believe it.
Sid Luckman, who last played in 1950, is number 2. Jim Harbaugh is number 3. Jim McMahon, the Super Bowl winner, is number 4, and he played there for 6 years. And Mitch Trubisky, is number 5 on the list as terms of passing yards go.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour is here for hour number 2. It's Fantasy Football Night in America here on the Better Sports Network. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC, at Eric Balkman on Twitter. That's EricBalkman. Check me out on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the Road of His High Stakes Lowdown as well. And check this guy out at the 33rdteam.com. You check out his weekly rankings each and every week during the NFL season. You hear him on the Goat District podcast, and he also contributes to Fantasy Pros as well. At FF Wheeler on the X Machine. It is Kev Wheeler joining me tonight to co-host the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. I actually misspoke. FF_Wheeler. Don't forget about the underscore. FF Wheeler is somebody completely different. FF_Wheeler is who you want to follow. Big Married with Children fan, or just Al Bundy in general?
So it's funny. I my first year of ranking with Fantasy Pros, I came in 33rd place. So I just looked up the number 33 in a picture, baby. And it was this. And then I ended up with the 33rd team, and it just kind of, and Al Bundy fits, peaked in high school, it's kind of me.
Yeah, no, I get it. By the way, Alex Core from Draft Sharks, who has the handle on X, peaked in HS_FF, last week's co-host on this very program. So we were getting a couple of guys going with the guy who never peaked in high school, but I probably peaked in life prior to high school. But joining us on the program today, and a Giants fan in Kev Wheeler here, Dom Gazzetti, he has a question in the YouTube chat. With you being a Giants fan, where do you have Saquon Barkley ranked if they don't bring anyone else in and he stays in New York? Is he a top 10 running back for you again this year?
I actually have him at RB9. Oof. Running back is weak. When he plays and he's healthy, he can be a stud. He's and let's just. I grew up a Giants fan. I got a lot of old hoodies that I haven't worn out yet. So that's kind of why I'm still, I guess, technically a fan, but I care more about my fantasy football than I do my laundry or anything like that. So, but yeah, right now I have Barkley at RB9, and I think it's kind of just by default, hoping for a healthy year. And I think the Giants probably should move on. But yeah, it is what it is. If he's gonna demand $15 million a year or something, forget about it. There's let that go somewhere else. You can't pay a running back in today's NFL. I mean, they deserve to get paid to a point, but there's so many plug and play running backs, and yeah, we've seen amazing years from Saquon, and he could be equal to CMC, but he just hasn't done it, right? He hasn't stayed healthy. We haven't seen it. So Yeah, I have him at RB9, and I think that's by default. And it's one of those, like, I probably won't be drafting much of him unless he falls to a spot where I can't deny.
Yeah, and I get it. And it's tough ranking these players this early in the season. Kudos to you for doing it. Bill Hollywood says he's having, in the YouTube chat, says he doesn't know to rank Garrett Wilson, Keenan Allen. He said the whole tight ends group in general. For the record, and I can't remember if you've said this in piecemeal, and I haven't picked up on it, but as of right now, January 18th, 2024, Kev, your top 3 tight ends, ranked tight ends going into 2024 drafts. Who are they, and in what order do you have them in?
So I actually just shifted it as we were talking. I put Mark Andrews at number 1. I can't take him out of that spot. If he stays healthy, he's the number 1 target on this team. Right? And then I have Laporta at number 2 and Kelsey at number 3. And again, Kelsey is kind of there by default. Like, I can't bring myself to drop him any lower than tight end 3, although there's reason to believe he could fall, especially Kansas City needs to bring in another wide receiver. They bring in another wide receiver that has talent. If Higgins ends up going there, Kelsey drops. He loses targets in that kind of situation. And Mike Evans could go there. Right? There's a whole slew of guys that could end up on Kansas City that really knock Kelsey down and out of that spot. I have Trey McBride at 4 right now, but we talked about it, like, really from 3 to 10, 3 to 9, 3 to 8. You're talking any combination of those tight ends. But for right now, I have Mark Andrews at 1 and Laporta at 2.
And by the way, I can't really disagree with it. It makes the logic makes perfect sense there too. I don't think you can have Kelsey number 1 going into next year, and you make a strong case for Andrews, and Laporta was unbelievable this year as well. Speaking of Andrews, Laporta, and Kelsey, 3 teams, player on 3 teams that are still in the playoff hunt for the Super Bowl championship. Let's get into our FFPC Playoff Challenge preview. Remember, if you want to play, myffpc.com is where to go to play the FFPC Playoff Challenge too. You're picking 1 player per team, 8 players in total, no kickers, no defenses, and watch them ride throughout the playoffs. You don't monkey with the lineups. You don't mess around with them throughout the playoffs. Once you set it, you forget it. $35 entry fee will get you playing for a $10,000 grand prize, $25,000 grand prize, beg your pardon, and a $200 entry fee will get you playing for a $100,000 grand prize. That's at myffpc.com. myffpc.com. Kev, let's start out with the Houston Texans. I feel like when we did this exercise with Alex Korf last week, I had fewer players on this list, but I have a lot of players for a lot of these teams. A lot of different ways you can go. CJ Stroud, if you believe in the Texans. Singletary, I don't know if we still want to include him. Nico Collins came through again last week. I don't know the injury status of Noah Brown. Maybe he's a fade. Maybe he's a guy that you go as a contrarian play. Or Dalton Schultz, another guy that wasn't all that well used last week, but we know the potential's there. How do you break down this Texans team? Who do you like best here?
So as far as this tournament, and I think I have to preface this by, like, specifically in this tournament, you're looking at, all right, so there's 3 rounds, but technically there are 2 teams that are going to play or have 4 games worth of points, right? Because
double
Super
points
Bowl
in the
counts
Super Bowl.
too.
Yep.
And then the other teams are only playing 1 or 2 games. So I'm not saying we need to set a bracket or anything, but we need to come up with 2 tiers. So, like, which teams do we think could play 4 games? Which teams are going to play 1 or 2? Mm-hmm. And Houston falls into that 1 or 2 category for me. I mean, I'm surprised. I shouldn't be surprised. I should have thought about they're at home, Cleveland's on the road. There's a whole bunch of different splits there. But I was so high on Cleveland and Flacco that I was just like, going to ride them. So if we're talking about a team that's going to play 1 or 2 games or be alive for 1 or 2 rounds, we want the most explosive piece of that team, right? In theory, we wouldn't have picked Ferguson as the most explosive piece on Dallas, but we also thought they were going multiple games. I think when you're talking about other teams. When you're talking about a team that's eliminated, like the Rams, right? I went with Cooper Kupp to be contrarian because I thought they would go 2 games, maybe even be competitive with San Francisco and pull an upset. But I should have thought about that as, if I got 1 game to play these guys, which is the guy that's going to explode the most? And in that situation, it would have been Puka. I think in this tournament, the way to go with Houston, the most explosive guy is Nico Collins. I like Stroud. He's proven to me that he is a solid quarterback in this league. I think for next year, I have him ranked. I forget where I have him ranked, but it's definitely as a QB1. But I just don't think he's going to take them to the Super Bowl. I don't think on the road going through Baltimore and then that would be Buffalo. Like, he's just not going to make it through those. I don't see it anyway. Devin Singletary, I like as a sleeper. He's really come on. He's gotten the touches, but he's not that explosive back. He's not going to be, especially if they lose in the first round, he's not going to be the guy that gets you there. Noah Brown could be a sneaky play, but he's been hurt.
Tyler Soto and just real quick, Tyler Soto, our producer, and Al Paul on YouTube already pointed out I was wrong. Well, I wasn't wrong. He's hurt, but he's on IR, so he is a non-factor.
Okay. I hadn't even factored him in, but I wasn't sure. That kind of scared me.
Yeah.
Dalton Schultz could be that sneaky play. He could be that guy that somehow gets 3 touchdowns. I would kind of keep him on the back burner as a thought, but again, this is just like Dallas in the last game. Like, for me to bench CeeDee Lamb for Ferguson would be similar, maybe not as drastic, to start Schultz over Collins. So it would be between Collins and Schultz for me on Houston. I would kind of keep that open.
And that's the way I lean too. I lean towards one of those players a little bit more than the other one, but we'll get into that in the next segment. Their opponent, the Baltimore Ravens. Lamar Jackson, I'll throw in Gus Edwards. I don't particularly like him for this, but we can talk about him as well. Zay Flowers as my lone receiver I like for Baltimore. And then let's throw in Mark Andrews here, now that it looks like he'll play. And then Isaiah Likely, a guy who's been very, very good in Mark Andrews' stead. I think you could make the case that if you want to take a stance on one of the tight ends, good on you. I am a weak man. I'm not going to be able to do that. To me, this comes down to Lamar Jackson or Zay Flowers. And I think this probably comes down to how good you think Baltimore is and how deep they're going to go.
So I have them winning this week for sure. And I think logically it's either them or Buffalo in the Super Bowl. And from this, so the way I look at the tight end situation, I think Mark Andrews would definitely get the start and the full-time snaps in the Super Bowl. Likely, I think, still plays a role as kind of a slottish kind of receiver, even with Andrews. I think Likely has proven himself enough at this point that he's kind of earned himself a role. But I don't think Andrews is coming back this week. And even if he does, he's certainly not going to get the full snaps. I'm kind of looking at it like Isaiah Likely a game and a half or 2 of production, and then Mark Andrews like 2 to 2.5 games of production if you're bringing Baltimore to the Super Bowl. So that split being what it is, I'm staying away from the Baltimore tight end. I would love to start either one of them if there was just one, but because we're not sure when Mark Andrews is coming back and what capacity he's going to be in, I would fade that. The likely turn, if you're not going to go Lamar at quarterback, is to Zay Flowers. But I think there are better receivers out there. And when we start putting the team together, we're going to realize, man, we have to bench somebody to get Flowers in. That's not going to feel that great. But he is the alternative if you don't go Lamar. I think the sneaky play, Gus Edwards is going to put balls in the end zone, but he's not going to get you that. you can't rely on him to get multiple 100-yard games in a 3-game set. He might squeeze out one, but that's unlikely. I think the sneaky play there would be Justice Hill. But again, because of the way it's split, I can't see really starting anyone other than Lamar or Zay. And I'm not so high on starting Zay. So like with Baltimore, like, and we'll get to it, you're either starting Lamar at quarterback or you're going with a second tier guy.
Right. Yeah. And Lamar Jackson's probably going to be right up there with the most owned quarterbacks in this competition too.
Right.
Like that's another thing to consider. But I think we have flushed out. We maybe have 3 options there, but I think it's more likely 2. We'll get into that coming up. Let's get into this Packers-Niners game. I can't remember if I told you this, Kev. I'm living 2 Jordan Love Hail Marys southwest of Lambeau Field, so I am a Packers fan. Perhaps you realize that when you see I put 8 different options on the rundown for the Packers in this contest. But I have Love and Jones, I mean, obviously, and then the receivers, Reed and Watson and Dobbs and Wicks. I have both those, or all 4 of those guys, and then both the tight ends in Musgrave and Kraft. I think when it comes down to it, if you believe in the Packers, you can make a case that Jordan Love should be your quarterback. If you don't, you look at Aaron Jones. But if you don't like Aaron Jones, I mean, any one of these guys could do it. Dobbs, 151 yards last week. Wicks got into the end zone. Jaden Reed was their leading receiver pretty much all season. And they think about Christian Watson, what he's been able to do when he's healthy. There's a lot of different ways you go with the Packers here.
Yeah, there's a ton of different ways you can go. And it's like I was highly impressed by what Green Bay did last week. I don't think they can go into San Francisco and even do anything similar. But I say that, and I would have said that about Dallas too.
Yeah, I did say that about Dallas. I didn't think they had any chance, and I was way wrong.
I completely faded Green Bay, and wow, was that a mistake, right? I think, like, I like Jordan Love, and I still like him against San Francisco's defense. I think, yeah. So when I look at matchups, right? The matchups they're not great to look at because, you know, our defenses will scheme differently for different teams. But I only go back 6 games when I'm looking at how a team has performed, because what happened in the first 12 weeks of the season has no bearing on what's going on in these games today. You could tell that from Philly, right? Like they were 10-1 and then nothing. Yeah. And Cleveland was just the opposite, you know, or was it Cleveland? Who won 5 of their last 6 games? What am I thinking of?
Well, Green Bay was close, but I don't think they did. No, was it Tampa?
It might,
or maybe they. I have to look it up now.
Anyway, I think when you're looking at the last 6 weeks, as far as fantasy points allowed to the quarterbacks of the teams that are left, San Francisco has given up the 3rd most amount of points to running backs in the last 6 weeks. Follow all the NFC teams just give it up to the quarterback, really. So Jordan Love is in the conversation if you think they're going to win this week. But really what you're looking at is what position player is going to have a super explosive game this week. Last week it was Aaron Jones, and actually you mentioned a couple of them. I think it could be Christian Watson this week. He's kind of flying under the radar, getting healthy.
Not listed on the injury report, on the final injury report, which is pretty big.
And I think you saw, and Wicks looks great. Like, I think he has a role. I think Romeo Dobbs is kind of that fallback option no matter what. And he seems to be a pretty good fallback option. But I think as Watson gets healthier, he takes that over. And Jaden Reed's going to bounce back, right? Like that last week was kind of an anomaly. So there's a couple options to pick from, but really this is where you can differentiate your lineup this week, right? Like pick a guy that's very low owned on Green Bay and cross your fingers that he has that explosive week. As we start putting in positions, though, I think we're going to find that running back is really weak, and we might have to go back to Aaron Jones. But again, Aaron Jones is probably going to be chalk.
He probably will be. He probably will be.
Yeah.
By the way, the Cleveland Browns coming into the playoffs, won 4 of their last 5. They lost the last game of the season, but that's when they benched everybody. Right. The Buffalo Bills, including this win over the Pittsburgh Steelers, they've won 6 in a row now, which is pretty impressive as well. Okay,
that's the one I was thinking of. That's the one I was thinking of. The Bills, they lost some heartbreakers, in the beginning and middle of the season, and they were kind of doubted. And I believed in them. Like, I really thought they would come back, but what they pulled off was quite amazing, and they're on a roll. And that's the other team. Well, we'll talk about it, but like, for me, are the Ravens or the Bills going to go to the Super Bowl? In my mind, San Francisco is probably there, but the AFC team in that Super Bowl, to me, is between the Bills and the Ravens.
So, interesting fact about the Bills, their biggest blowout of the season that they lost was week 1 to the New York Jets in overtime. 22-16. That was their biggest loss of the season. They lost on a 65-yard Xavier Gibson punt return for a touchdown in week 1. That was their biggest loss. They lost to the Jaguars by 5. They lost to the Patriots by 4. The Bengals they lost to by 6 as well. But then they lost to the Broncos by 2. And then their last loss on the season came against the Philadelphia Eagles at the Link, where they lost 37-34. And that was, God, I don't even know. That was Thanksgiving weekend, which has been an incredible run that Buffalo has been on. Let's talk about Buffalo in the next segment. But before we get to our break, San Francisco, Green Bay's opponent. A lot of different ways you could go here. Kind of depends upon how deep you think San Francisco goes. But Purdy, McCaffrey, both the receivers, Kittle, they're all in play here, Kev.
All of them. All of them are in play. Purdy has the easiest matchups all the way to the Super Bowl. McCaffrey is a stud. We could talk about all of his performances all night. Debo, another stud. Like, he's the guy that could emerge as, like, all of a sudden he has a 3-game stretch that puts everybody to shame. Ayuk, like, he's an alpha on most teams. And then Kittle is that kind of that championship guy, that championship winner that, like, all of a sudden just lights a fire and can go off for 3 weeks. So, like, San Francisco is the team, I would say, put them on the back burner and decide which 49er you're going to start last. Because what position do you need to fill in? And I've gone through it enough that I end up with McCaffrey every time, because there's somebody that's going to score close to Purdy. Purdy might have more points at the quarterback position than any other quarterback, but McCaffrey is going to be so far ahead of every running back that I don't think you can exclude him. Although, there might be options, but all 5 of them are tough to keep out of the lineup.
Yeah.
And that's why I kind of let me leave this to the end and decide from there.
Which is sort of the opposite way that we normally do it. But because San Francisco is so good and so talent laden at multiple positions, might be able to do it. And it might be the difference in winning $100,000 or not winning $100,000 this year. Tyler Soto, our producer, says he said it last week and he's saying it again this week. Texans, Niners, Super Bowl. The D'Amico Ryans revenge game. You'd love to see it if it happens. Listen, we have had a lot of fun putting together or analyzing the teams here. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we talked about the Saturday games. Let's talk about the Sunday games. We'll talk about Detroit and Tampa. We'll talk about Kansas City and Buffalo, and then we will put together our lineup here for the FFPC Playoff Challenge 2. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. He's Kev Wheeler from the 33rd Team. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show rolls on the Better Sports Network right after this.
From the hometown series, Zach Purry
Very nice card. And that's when I'll probably have to organize a little trade ski with you, because I would actually like that card.
You got downtown Newark in the background. I mean, that Newark has never looked so good.
No, it is not.
We'll put that back up on the screen. I just want to have a penny sleeve ready, and yes, we can absolutely work out a little trade ski for that, because that belongs in a Devil fans collection right there.
I'll trade you the Braden Schneider rookie card for it.
Done.
There we go. The first card for card trade on Rip and Rip history. And it was that easy.
It was that easy. That's because, you know why? Because neither one of us are jerks. And it's the same thing when we try and do fantasy trades. Like, we don't try and screw each other. We have conversations. If there's a fit, there's a fit. If it's not, it's not. We don't try and, like, take the other one over the barrel. So there you go, in a penny sleeve. Hometown hero, Zach Parise. He was among the league's most productive goal scorers in 06-07 and followed up with a terrific regular season with an even more impressive postseason. And then they talk about what he did in the first round series against Tampa Bay that year. So that's off to the side for you.
That's true. And, if this is it for his career, he had a hell of a career.
He did.
Hopefully he comes back one more year with the Islanders, but if he doesn't, hell of a run.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour rolls on here. High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Force of habit. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show rolls on the Better Sports Network here, exclusively on BSN, as we take you into the best of the Better Sports Network coming up at the top of the hour. The Fantasy Alarm All-Pro subscription is something I always enjoy telling you about. You can unlock all the content for sports, including annual draft guides, one-on-one expert access in the Discord. Of course, you can sync up your leagues to analyze matchups and trends in your specific leagues. The lineup generator on there is integrated with Fanjections. There's daily rankings, weekly rankings. The value vault's on there, position coaches, as well as the waiver wire, ownership percentages, projections, stats, and tools. Build better lineups, guaranteed. Get access to everything Fantasy Alarm offers all year. Use promo code LOCK at fantasyalarm.com/lock. Fantasyalarm.com/lock. LOCK is the code you want to use there. Okay, we got through the Saturday games. Sunday, Tampa, Detroit. Apparently the most expensive divisional playoff game ever to get into. You're looking at an average ticket price of just under $1,200 to get into Ford Field. You are looking at a minimum of like $700 just to get in and stand for 3 hours and watch the Lions. Oh, these are not your father's Lions. They are a different team. Not Matthew Stafford. Baker Mayfield talked to some of his old Rams teammates, and they said it was the loudest thing they ever heard playing in Ford Field last week. We'll see what the Buccaneers do. Let's start off with Tampa here in this game. Mayfield, Rachaad White, the two receivers, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, I think are in play. And I'll throw in Cade Otton, tight end premium scoring for the FFPC Playoff Challenge number 2. So I think you got to include him here. Again, a lot of different ways you can go, but none of these guys to me strike me as, oh, this is the guy I got to play here, Kev. There's you can make a case for almost anybody.
So I would exclude Rachaad White just because of Detroit's run defense. And they are a pass funnel. As far as the past 6 weeks, they've given up the third most fantasy points to wide receivers, I believe it is. I think, in the NFL, and by far the most in the playoffs. So I am looking at either Evans or Godwin there. Don't get me wrong, Otton is an option. He had a 20-point week last week. He really started to emerge. But I also think if you watch that game, Mike Evans dropped 2 deep passes.
Yes, he did.
Like one was just so blatantly through his hands. Like you could tell he just wanted to go home after that. But, the other receivers picked it up. And if you're playing any DFS this week, Baker Mayfield is a sneaky play. I was in school talking. There's actually a fantasy football club. I don't run it. Another teacher does. Shout out to Delaney Fantasy Football Club. Because a couple of them probably listening. But they said they were gonna. But I was saying this week that I had Mayfield as my QB2 just for this week. Purdy is my QB1 this week just because of the matchups and what's going on. So he's a sneaky play for this week, but I don't think Tampa is going to be able to go into Detroit, and I hadn't heard about the noise and the ticket prices, but it doesn't surprise me. Those fans are rabid.
30
right?
plus years they've been waiting
Holy
for this. 30
cow.
plus
And
years.
like emotional, like apparently a fan came up to David Montgomery and was like, "You're my hero. Thank you so much." Like, and bought him lunch. Like just like like an older lady that you wouldn't think even watches the NFL. Like, so yeah, that city is like really psyched for this game and paying with money they don't have probably.
Well, they're not spending it on the Pistons. I'll tell you that. All their Pistons money can go right to the Lions this year. That would make sense.
But yeah, I'm staying away from Rachaad White and Mayfield, although I think he puts up numbers this week. I don't think they get past this week. So you're looking at Evans and Godwin. Again, Godwin, I think he's a very consistent type player. Last week he was saved by that late touchdown. I think it's Mike Evans is the guy you kind of have to play. He has 2 touchdown, 150-yard upside written all over him in kind of a makeup game from last week.
That is Tampa. The other side of the football, I will include Jared Goff because, let's face it, I've been including every quarterback so far. The 2 running backs, Gibbs and Montgomery, and then you're looking at the top 2 pass catchers in St. Brown and Laporta. I was a little skittish on Laporta because I didn't know how his knee was going to react last week. I felt really confident in St. Brown. He came through. He's Mr. Consistent. But maybe one of these running backs is the wild card again. If you want to differentiate yourself, maybe Gibbs or Montgomery is the play over St. Brown and Laporta. How do you see the line for the FFPC playoff shot number 2?
So with Vita Vea in the lineup for Tampa, I don't start running backs against Vita. I just don't. And with them splitting, they can both be successful in their own way, but what we're really looking for is explosion, right? Although Detroit probably wins this game, so we're looking for over the next 2 weeks. And I was really looking at Laporta, but I believe he only had like a 36% snap share last week, and he was kind of saved. I think he had 3 targets and was saved by that touchdown. Coming back from that injury, like I had written him off for the playoffs altogether. So to be able to come back from that, like, wow. But I don't think he has that explosion type game. I guess any tight end can score 3 touchdowns, but when you're talking about a guy like Amon-Ra, like he's just putting up 20 points every week. Like, and I don't think it matters who they play. So even next week going against whether it's Green Bay or San Francisco, I won't assume it's San Francisco just because I'm on the mic with you. But yeah, I think ARSB stands out ahead of the others. Yes, you could, if you're looking for a tight end, I don't hate Laporta, but I don't like the fact that he's not completely healthy and getting that full snap share.
3 targets. You're right. 3 targets last week. He caught all of them, but just for 14 yards with a long of 8. So it wasn't great for Laporta last week. He was saved by that touchdown. And if he doesn't score that touchdown, we're probably singing a different tune about Laporta this week.
And the matchup is great because Tampa is horrible against tight ends. But you know, if you're not going to play every down, I don't know if I can really go with.
Let's go with the final game of the NFL playoffs, a game that many people, not only in Kansas City and Buffalo, are looking forward to, but people around the NFL. We saw what these 2 teams did a couple of years ago. It was fantastic, and maybe we'll see another great performance this year from one of these 2 teams. We'll start with Kansas City. Patrick Mahomes, obviously, always in the discussion. We talked about how good Isaiah Pacheco is running right now. And then Rashee Rice, who has been coming on at the end of the season. You have to include Travis Kelce, at least in the discussion. Whether we go with him as our chief is a completely different discussion here, Kev.
Yeah, and I have Kansas City losing to Buffalo. So I want the most explosive player in this game, which to me rules Kelce out at this point. And because I'm thinking they lose to Buffalo, that would rule out Mahomes as well. And I give Buffalo the advantage here because they are at home. They have beaten Kansas City twice. Kansas City just doesn't look like the same team. Even last week, yes, they beat Miami. They did it fairly handily. But you saw them move the ball down the field and kick field goals. They were able to squeeze 2 in, but like I just didn't see what I saw was Rashee Rice look like a superstar. Yeah. And that is where I would hedge here. And I know I'm leaning all chalk, but I really don't think you have to differentiate other than maybe 1 or 2 players in this. And I think there'll probably maybe still be a good amount of ownership on Pacheco and Kelsey. So maybe they split it 3 ways. I think more people will probably lean with Rashee Rice after last week, but I still think that's probably the way you want to go.
I think that is a nice little pivot, number one, if we can get Rice in there. And number 2, I still think that Mahomes Rice, there's a non-zero chance that he is the most unowned Kansas City player. If we call this the big 4 between Mahomes, Pacheco, Rice, and Kelsey, he might be the guy that's owned least among those. So that is a sneaky good call there, Kev.
So I did have Pacheco in my lineups last week. So, yeah, you could be right there. And Kelsey was pretty highly owned. Yeah. I should pull up Fantasy Mojo's ownership. But if that's the case, then Rashee Rice is definitely the play. I think he does it again. Like, I think he's the guy. I think he's the alpha on the team now.
Final team we have not talked about yet. It's the Buffalo Bills. Josh Allen, who I think, along with Lamar Jackson, those will be your top 2 owned quarterbacks in this this playoff challenge 2 with the FFPC. James Cook is going to be involved in a Pro Bowl running back here. We have to mention him, especially considering the lack of depth at running back. Stephon Diggs will still throw in there. I don't want to say he bounced back last week because that's not a bounce back by his standards, but he did look a lot better than he had in previous weeks. Still no word on Gabe Davis, and then we'll throw in Dalton Kincaid, the most athletic, the biggest playmaking tight end that Buffalo has. We'll throw him in there as well. Analyzing the Buffalo Bills for this competition is important because there's a pretty good chance they get to the Super Bowl here, Wheels.
Yeah. So this is where I've come to the decision, like with Buffalo, when I picked Lamar as my quarterback, I went with James Cook. And other than that, I would pick Josh. I had Josh Allen and Lamar as my quarterbacks last week. Or for last week's
for the playoff challenge.
Tournament.
Got it. Yep.
Yeah. Right. Because Lamar didn't play last week. But when I went with James Cook over Stephon Diggs. Stephon Diggs is getting targeted less. I think he's really only getting targeted when Allen has to throw to him. And I feel like it's been that way for weeks now. Don't get me wrong, Diggs could have an explosive game, but I think over the course of 2 or 3 games, I would rather have any of the other guys. James Cook to me was the play because I didn't see too many other options at running back that looked good. The more I'm looking at it this week, Kincaid is really an option. I kind of thought with Knox in there, it takes away from Kincaid. But Kincaid's kind of etched out his own role at this point. Sometimes it's those tight end reception types. Sometimes it's the slot. And he even lines up outside sometimes now too. So Kincaid has his unique role. Kincaid has the best chance of being that explosive other player, I think. So that might be our answer at tight end there too. Other than that, I've been fading Diggs, and I think I'm going to continue that. Last week didn't make me
100% with you on Diggs. Like I don't, you don't want to call any of these guys league winners because, quite frankly, they all could be, in a smaller contest, or not a smaller contest, but a shorter period of time that this contest goes over in. But I'm 100% fading Diggs, and I feel good about it. Let's formulate the lineup here, Kev. Here's what I want to do.
All right.
Let's go through the teams and let's go through the ones that we kind of settled on one specific player, right? So I think of Tampa. Okay. You're pretty good with Mike Evans, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're gonna go with Mike Evans. My pen would work here. We're gonna go with Mike Evans as our Tampa representative. Now, let's go to Detroit. It sounded like Amon-Ra St. Brown is still to play there, right? Okay.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to find somebody else, but I really
looked again, and there was really still nobody there.
There's just nobody there.
Now let's go to. So we got our top 2 receivers. Well, I'll ask you this: which team do you want to go to next? Are we doing Lamar Jackson for Baltimore?
Let's.
Now we don't have to. I'm not trying to paint you into a corner here. I'm just asking you.
I have no problem with that whatsoever.
Or do you want to wait? Do you want to wait and handle Baltimore later?
Let's make our last 3 picks: the San Francisco, Buffalo,
Baltimore.
And Baltimore.
All right. So
because I think the Super Bowl is probably going to be a combination of those.
Start off with Houston. Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz were the 2 guys we talked about. I said I like one of those guys a little bit more than the other. I'm leaning towards Collins here.
Okay, I'm fine with that. I think the pivot to Collins would be Schultz, right? And then you're talking about I'm thinking of it in my head right now as like Collins and Kincaid or Schultz and who else from Buffalo. So Collins is the guy for me there.
Now, when we were talking Chiefs, it did sound like you liked Rashee Rice best, right? Now, if we do Rashee Rice, which I'm totally on board with, that means the first 4 slots we have filled are all receivers, which means all our flexes are taken. You're good with that? For now, we'll do Rashee Rice as our flex.
I think those 4 receivers are the ones that really stick out.
They do, yeah.
Then again, when we get to San Francisco, don't get me wrong, Debo and Ayuk are in that category, but we need running backs, right?
All right. So hold on. So let's bury that lead for a second because we'll save San Francisco.
Okay.
So we haven't done a Packer yet. Does that mean since we need running backs, we got to go Aaron Jones here?
I mean, here's the thing. If you don't go Aaron Jones, you're talking about either switching to Pacheco or going with Cook from Buffalo. And then you are picking a Packers receiver. That's a 1 in 4 dice roll, right? It could be any of those 4. You could make a case for Reed or Watson or Doubs or Wicks. And maybe that if you want to differentiate, that might be the place to do it. But I think when you're talking about who's going to give me the most points, and San Francisco hasn't been great against running back either, from what I think I looked at before.
They honestly, they actually, I forget what the stat is. I think Green Bay I forget what basis it was. It wasn't DVOA.
Here it is. Ahead. So it's not DVOA, and I probably should look at DVOA, but in the last 6 games, although San Francisco has only given up they've been tough as far as fantasy points allowed. They've given up the 9th least fantasy points allowed, which is you're getting towards the middle there too. But yards per carry, they've given up the 4th most.
Interesting.
So that could be the schemes and who they're playing against. But Aaron Jones is a pretty quality running back. And if you're giving up the 4th most yards per carry, I like starting Aaron Jones in those situations.
All right. And I'm down with that too. I mean, especially if they can control the clock, Aaron Jones is going to be a huge reason for that against the Niners. Okay.
Right. And that's what they're going to be looking to control
yeah.
the clock, right? They want to keep the ball out of the guy's hand.
That means we're down to a quarterback, a running back, and a tight end, and we have the big three here. Baltimore, Buffalo, San Francisco. Who do we want to attack first?
So let's decide on tight end.
Okay. Comes down to Kincaid, Kelsey, or one of the Ravens.
Kincaid, Kittle,
or
one
Kittle.
of the Ravens.
Yeah, not Kelsey. Kittle. Idiots, yeah.
And as much as I like it, and this, for those at home putting together a lineup, this is another place you could really pivot, right? So in tournaments like these, it's probably good to buy a bunch of teams.
Right, right. Yes, thank you. Yeah. We appreciate that.
and I don't even have a promo code. But this is where you pivot and differentiate. I just looking at this now as we're sitting here, I feel comfortable with like Kincaid and then Lamar and then CMC.
Yeah, and that
like CMC is the pure chalk, right? But that's okay if he's going to outscore every other running back and possibly keep even with Purdy at quarterback, right?
Yeah.
Like, so Purdy might outscore him, but it'll be like 3 or 4 points,
right?
And Lamar and Purdy should be around the same amount of points, but McCaffrey's going to outscore every running back imaginable every week. So that's where I kind of lean, just sticking with the chalk with CMC. And Lamar is also semi-chalk. I think he was like 30%, 40% owned in the first round. But then you look at tight end, and where was Kincaid?
On the season you're talking about?
Kincaid was no, as far as ownership in the FFPC
in the playoff challenge, yeah.
In that first, he was 6.5% owned in the playoff.
So that is a massive pivot.
So the Kincaid pivot is nice, and you have a couple others there. Rashee Rice, he'll probably be more owned, but in the first round he was 10% owned. So you do have some guys here that differentiate a little bit,
and I think that's all you need. Like, you don't want a ton, like you want some. And I think Rashee Rice and Dalton Kincaid are the secret sauce to this lineup, which I have right here. This is the Kev Wheeler. I can put it up to my screen here. The Kev Wheeler high stakes fantasy football show lineup for the FFPC Playoff Challenge 2. Lamar Jackson at quarterback, Aaron Jones and Christian McCaffrey are the running backs. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Mike Evans, Nico Collins, and Rashee Rice at wide receiver. Dalton Kincaid is your tight end. And there you have it. We just won somebody $100,000 tonight. Maybe you, Kev. You never know.
If you do win, like,
tips accepted.
I'm not saying you have to, but yeah, the PayPal's
open. Exactly right. Exactly right.
Hit the DMs for the email.
Always fun talking postseason football with you. Always fun talking just any kind of football with you, Kev. For everybody who is not aware, and I've said it throughout the show tonight, you do your weekly rankings for the 33rd team. You're a contributor to Fantasy Pros, the GOAT District podcast every so often, which I know JD is going to twist your arm and get you on a few of those for early drafting too. Is there anything else I missed? Is there any other ways that we could consume more content from the wheels?
The best way to get a hold of me, ask me questions, anything, is the 33rd Team Discord. So if you go to the the33rd.com website, go to any of the fantasy articles down the bottom or somewhere within there, there's a link to Discord. If you're not on Discord, I promise you, it's not I'm over 50 and I know how to use it. It's not that difficult to use and download, but you get to talk to me. It's a free Discord channel. I think they're going to put it behind a paywall soon, but if you get in there now, the chances are you'll be kept in there. This Discord has everything you could imagine. And it matches any pay for Discord. So get in there now while the iron's hot. Hit me up. You can DM me. You can talk in our fantasy talk section or the start sit section. Start sits I was live on every Sunday morning. It's dead right now, so that's a good channel to hit me up on. But yeah, the 33rd Team Discord, get in there now while it's still free. It's pretty lit in there, and everybody contributes, so you can talk to anybody from the
33rdteam.com is where to go. And speaking of the 33rd Team, Josh Larkey co-hosting with me next week. Thanks for watching, everybody. Best of the Better Sports Network's up next.